Have you ever looked at a map and wondered, how did that happen? We're talking about a place that saw its colonial masters try to trade it away twice, endured a decades-long dictatorship, and then had a president who refused to leave until an entire regional army literally showed up on his border. And yet, somehow this tiny nation earned the nickname the Smiling Coast. Today we're zooming in on a country that's an absolute geopolitical curiosity and a testament to resilience. The Gambia. First things first, you can't talk about the Gambia without talking about its big brother, Senegal. For centuries before the borders were officially drawn in the late 19th century, this entire region was often known as Senegambia. It was a shared cultural space, and the history of one is deeply intertwined with the other. This region was home to several powerful groups, specifically the Malinka and Wolof kingdoms. And their stories were already unfolding long before any Europeans showed up. They were locally powerful, yes, but none of them were ever quite strong enough to dominate all of Senegambia. And what happens when a region is constantly dealing with internal, back and forth conflicts? It makes it an unfortunately easy target for outside powers to come in and try to take control. Speaking of outside powers, who was the first to sail in? That honour goes to the Portuguese. In 1455, the Venetian explorer Alvise Cadamosto arrived. Then they set up trading stations in the late 1400s, introducing crops like peanuts and cotton, but they eventually abandoned them within a century. But once the word was out about the trade possibilities in West Africa, the scramble was on. So the next 2 centuries saw trading companies from England, France, the Netherlands, Sweden and Courland all showing up, eager to get a piece of the action. Now, who was the main rival? It was France and England who spent the entire 18th century locked in a struggle for prestige over Senegambia. Even though, ironically, early trade wasn't even that profitable. The game changed in 1816. The British, with a new focus on controlling the devastating slave trade, sent Captain Alexander Grant to establish a base. He bought Banjul Island from the King of Combo, setting up barracks and artillery to control the river's entrance. And from 1821 to 1843, the Gambia was administered as part of British West Africa. Then, by 1880, France had consolidated control over Senegal. The British actually tried twice in the 1870s to trade the Gambia to the French, but domestic and local opposition foiled the plans. Finally, at a conference in Paris in 1889, the deal was struck. France ceded control of the Gambia River to Britain. Then in 1900, Britain established the interior as a protectorate and imposed indirect rule, dividing it into 35 chiefdoms. But let's be real, the real power was concentrated in the British governor and his staff on Banjul Island. So in the years that followed, including the 2 world wars, the Gambians fought for independence. Then in the 1950s, the demand for self-rule got louder. Finally, they got it. Britain granted the Gambia independence on February 18th, 1965, and it became a republic in 1970. The first president was Sir Dawda Jawara. Jawara's long rule was briefly interrupted by a coup attempt in 1981, which was put down with the help of Senegalese troops. That close call led to something called the Senegambia Confederation, a loose federation with Senegal, starting in 1982. The whole idea was to merge their military and economic resources. But it only lasted until 1989, when the Gambia decided to pull out. So, while it was an interesting political union, it was just a temporary thing, and the Gambia went back to being a fully independent country again. After that, Jawara kept winning elections until the bombshell hit in July 1994. Then, a young captain named Yahya Jammeh staged a quick, bloodless coup, claiming corruption. Jammeh took over, ending 2 decades of Jawara's rule. Everyone thought that this was the time of change, but Jammeh's regime quickly became authoritarian, and the corruption he promised to eliminate became worse under his watch. Media freedom was restricted, and international groups cited human rights abuses. There were coup attempts throughout the 2000s and 2010s, showing domestic discontent was growing. Jammeh even declared the Gambia an Islamic Republic, and pulled out of key international groups. This brings us to the December 2016 presidential election. The opposition finally united behind one candidate, Adama Barrow. Against all odds, Barrow was declared the winner. But wait for it. Less than a week later, Jammeh reversed his concession. He rejected the results and demanded a new election, defying the entire world. The standoff was on. Barrow prepared to take office, and the regional military force called ECOWAS assembled troops. Jammeh refused to step down. So what did Barrow do? He was sworn in as president in neighbouring Senegal. It wasn't until diplomats intervened one last time that Jammeh finally agreed to step down and leave the country on January 21st, 2017. The crisis was over. Barrow flew home to massive crowds and immediately set up the Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commission to document the abuses under Jammeh. Since then, Barrow won re-election in 2021, and the Gambia was determined to keep that democratic future alive. But before we see how that's going, let's first understand where the Gambia is. If you look at a map, the Gambia is one of the most uniquely shaped countries in the world, spanning only about 11,300 square kilometres, or 4,361 square miles. Situated on the western coast of Africa, roughly halfway between the equator and the Tropic of Cancer, the Gambia is basically a long, slender ribbon of land hugging both banks of the Gambia River. So what makes this river so special? The river has always been the Gambia's main artery. It's what allowed colonisation to take hold, and today it's still the principal means of transporting everything, from passengers to freight to mail. But what about the land? Well, it's mostly a low-lying plateau. Geologically, it's sitting on a compacted sandstone layer laid down millions of years ago during the Miocene-Pliocene periods. As you move upriver, you'll hit the mangrove swamps. These dense masses of mangrove trees are teeming with wildlife but are generally too swampy and salty for farming or settlement. Then the mangroves give way to open savanna and freshwater swamps, interspersed with patches of forest, baobab and kapok trees. Here you'll find the famous fertile, annually flooded river flats, known locally as Banto Faros. This is where intensive rice cultivation happens, because the lighter, well-drained sandy soils of the slopes are perfect for growing peanuts, which historically became the backbone of the economy. This is also where most people choose to settle, positioning their villages high enough to avoid the floods, but low enough to benefit from the arable land. Now for the wildlife. The river and its swamps are fantastic habitats. You'll find warthogs, different species of monkeys and baboons, antelope, and yes, the river itself is home to the hippopotamus and the crocodile. And for the bird lovers out there, over 600 species have been recorded, including colourful kingfishers, herons, and sunbirds. So, the geography of the Gambia is a story of a single, dominant feature that gave birth to a nation. Next up, we're going to dive into the current political landscape and the unique governance of this long, thin country. Are you ready to jump into the political and economic realities of modern-day Gambia? So let's start with the big picture. The Gambia is still navigating its post-dictatorship transition, which is a massive and complex undertaking. Remember that dramatic political standoff back in 2016? That election marked the end of 22 years of autocratic rule under Yahya Jammeh. The current president, Adama Barrow, assumed office in 2017 and was re-elected in the December 2021 presidential poll as the candidate for his newly launched National People's Party. His administration has been focused on consolidating democracy and pushing for institutional reform, which is a tough job. So, how's he doing? By now we know that Gambia is the smallest country on mainland Africa, but it's got a GDP of just about $2.51 billion in 2024. And despite global headwinds, the economy is doing pretty well. Real GDP growth is expected to accelerate from an estimated 5.3% in 2024 to a projected 5.7% in 2025. What's driving this growth? It's mainly the services sector, like tourism, trade and construction, plus a big boost from private investment. But there's always a challenge, right? The biggest one has been inflation. To keep prices under control, the Central Bank of the Gambia has maintained a tight monetary policy, keeping its key policy rate high at 17%. That's their tool to stabilise things. And guess what? It's working. Inflation is easing, dropping from 11.7% in 2024 to an expected 9% in 2025. This moderation is super important because it directly impacts people's wallets. Combined with rising incomes and those crucial remittance inflows, it's actually helping to reduce poverty. The extreme poverty rate is slowly but steadily declining, projected to drop from 20.7% to about 20.4% by 2025. This shows the growth is, however slowly, reaching the average household. But there's another shadow hanging over the economy. It's public debt. Even though the government is tightening its belt and boosting revenue collection, the debt level is projected to be around 71.3% of GDP in 2025. So what does that mean in simple terms? It means the Gambia is still at a high risk of debt distress. It's like having a big credit card bill. The government has to be extremely careful that every shilling they borrow is used wisely for development, and not just to pay off old bills. On the trade front, they had a current account deficit of 5.8% of GDP in 2024, partly due to importing materials for big projects. But that's expected to narrow to 5% in 2025, which is a healthy sign of improving trade balances. So, in a nutshell, the Gambia is on a clear path of economic recovery, fueled by service industries and strong policy moves by the central bank. But the transition to a stable democracy is still a work in progress, and the government remains burdened by significant inherited debt. It's a country fighting hard for a future that is both politically open and economically sound. Next up, let's dive into the culture. We'll talk about the food, the music, and the incredible people who give this country its famous nickname. Did you know that the Gambia is called the smiling coast of West Africa? And it's not just because the country's shape on the map is sometimes said to resemble a grin. It's because of the people. Gambians are genuinely famous for their incredible warmth, their laid-back attitude, and their welcoming nature, making you feel like a valued friend the moment you arrive. And the first thing you'll notice, stemming from that hospitality, is the incredible religious tolerance. The country is overwhelmingly Muslim. Up to 90% of the people follow Islam, which came to West Africa about 1,000 years ago. But the Gambia prides itself on being secular and totally open-minded. The remaining folks are mainly Christian, or they follow localized traditional beliefs. And so, what are those traditional beliefs like? Well, many are centered around animism. That's the cool idea that natural things like plants, places, and even the souls of ancestors all have a spirit. That's why it's pretty common to see small offerings, like incense or flowers, left in sacred areas to show respect. Then, if you're walking around the Gambia, you won't just see the culture, you'll also feel the rhythm, all because music is a huge part of life. And at the heart of all that sound is the kora. Have you ever seen one? It's a magnificent traditional string instrument with about 21 strings that looks like a mix between a harp and a lute. It's made from a huge gourd covered with cow skin, and its sound is just totally hypnotic and relaxing. Plus, the people who play the kora aren't just musicians either. They're called griots or jalis. They're the living, breathing history books. These storytellers preserve the ancient narratives and family histories of the Mande people through their songs. Of course, you'll hear modern sounds too, like mbalax. That's a lively fusion of traditional drumming and Western pop. But here, the ancient and the modern flow together perfectly. Now, you know I can't talk about a country without talking about the food, because if you truly want to know the Gambia, you have to eat the local dishes. Sure, you can find a Chinese or English breakfast, but the traditional cuisine, based on staples like rice and cassava, is the real deal. The most popular dish, the national comfort food, is domoda. It's a rich, hearty stew made with meat or fish cooked in this incredible, thick groundnut puree, onions and spices, all served over white rice. Trust me, it is absolutely everywhere. You've also got to try benachin. That name literally means one pot in Wolof, and it's the Gambian take on jollof rice. They cook the rice right there in the fish, meat, and vegetable mixture until all those amazing flavours merge. Then there's yassa, which is meat marinated in a zesty, sharp mix of chilies, lime, onions, and mustard. And here's a beautiful tradition. When you're invited to eat in a Gambian home, be prepared for a communal experience. Everyone gathers around one large bowl, and you eat from your section using your right hand. It's a powerful way to reinforce that strong community spirit. And to wash it all down, try a refreshing non-alcoholic drink like wonjo juice, made from dried hibiscus flowers. Or how about baobab juice? It's made from the giant baobab tree fruit and is packed with vitamins. Then, if you're feeling a little adventurous, you could even try palm wine, a cloudy white drink that's the fermented sap of palm trees. It can be sweet and mild when fresh, or sour and strong as it ferments. Overall, that unique blend of faith, the ancient arts like the kora, shared meals, and that ever-present hospitality is what makes the Gambia an unforgettable destination. It truly earns its nickname. The Gambia proves that the biggest stories often come from the smallest places, or even the most unsuspecting players. So, if you could have a griot write a song about your life, what would the title of the song be? Sound off in the comments below. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, you'll love this next one.